everyone. I'm Adrian, Philip, Jay. We're from Audio Excellence Canada. And today we're going to talk about horn speakers. Love them or hate them. And again, our videos are not scripted. I have not asked these guys what their thoughts are. And they don't know what I'm going to say. So it'll be whatever it is, and we'll let the chips fall where they may. So Jay, why don't you start with, we'll start with you.
I love this topic. I really like horn speakers. And the reason being is that there's some type of this holographicness to them and crisp sound they produce. It's really unexplainable in a way because some of these horn speakers that I played around in the past, like they're just fun. Like Altec A4s, was it? Was it A4?
What are you talking about?
The voice of the theater speakers.
Those are A7s.
A7s.
A6.
God, this morning. The Altec A7s, voice of the theater speakers, those were really fun to play around with different amplifiers, see how they change, because they changed drastically. JBL L300s.
Those aren't horns.
Horn loaded in the mid-range. And Klipsch RP600Ms, which are tiny bookshelf speakers, but they had such a, I'm a rock guy, so that speaker really did it for me. And the 8000F, a lot of the horn speakers that I played around with, from Klipsch, La Scala to Klipsch horns to JBLs to Altecs, they all to me sound different and fun, and I think that's the word there. Fun. They're just fun sounding speakers, and they may not be perfect. They may not be to everyone's preference. They may not be the most accurate, but they're fun. They change easily depending on the components you use. And it's just about if you're a person who really likes to play around with different gear and appreciate the little changes, the horn is it.
Okay.
Especially if you like rock.
Philip, what about you?
They don't change at all. So I don't know how you're hearing it. What they do, the good horns, and I'm talking about not Klipsch, those new ones.
Okay.
Those are horn loaded of a variety, but they're not true full horns like the A7 or the voice of the theater. And I lived with horn loaded real horns for a long time because I had the Magnificence.
Okay. I
had which are voice of the theater. I had Tannoy GRF autographs,
yep,
which is a big horn.
Yep.
I listened to JBL Hartsfields, which are big folding horns. I've listened to all sorts of different vintage horns and new horns, Egger horns. These are true horns. Avant-garde.
Mm-hmm. Avant-garde, yes.
Avant-garde. I listened to
Love
a pair
those.
Well, but suffice it to say, I went through that stage.
Yeah.
Now I know what you might be saying about it seems to change all the time. What you're really hearing is the amplification.
Yeah. That's
So
what I'm
the
talking about.
horns are so revealing, and because they're so efficient, they reveal any little tiny variance.
Yeah.
So if the amp sounds a certain way or your combination sounds a certain way, the horn's going to be truthful.
Yeah, let me just clarify what I said. I didn't mean that, depending on the day they change sound. I meant, depending on the component, they change sound. So yeah.
So horns do a certain kind of thing. In other words, they're going to throw sound out into the middle of a room. Their efficiency is built around an actual physics of the way the shape of the horn will increase the amount of energy going out into the room.
Just like if I do this.
Yes, exactly. A mega horn works simply because it takes a small column of air and expands it into a big column of air.
Yep.
And in doing so, it invokes, an increase in sound pressure level.
Yeah.
So, of course, I love horns. I live with them.
You're the one who made me get into horns.
So if I could have them again in my setup, I would do it. But my setup is now too small to accommodate big horns. I thought about it a lot. I looked on Canuck. I found a couple pairs of voice of theaters, and they're actually reasonably priced. So you can get a good pair for like $2,000,
But those are
$2,500.
gigantic. There's no way they're
But
gonna
yeah,
fit in
you
your
need a
space.
fairly big room. I used to have a big basement, so I could do it. And even when I had my condo, I had the GRFs sat in the corner, so they didn't really come out into the room. It actually made the entire room the sound stage. It was beautiful. So of course I love horns, and because they're so immediate, they're so fast, they're as fast as electrostatics, they're very efficient, which means you can use a very low powered amp, which actually has a lot of purity that, when you scale up an amplifier, it's hard to do that well, but low power is easier to do well. So you can get by with slightly less expensive stuff, although you don't, because, an audio note on Gaku is how much? How much money? I mean, so,
Well,
yeah.
Jumping to the other side, the negative side of the horn speakers. I never found this to be exactly. I never really found this, but some people say it's nasal sounding, right? And that some horns don't have enough bass, and some people also say stuff like that the horn speakers are bright and sharp, depending on the components they use. So, and they don't image well, and these are some of the negative things that people say about horns. I just wanted to put that out there because it seems like this video is turning into
they're
like
all
a horn
wrong.
fanboy. Huh?
They're all wrong.
Wrong.
So let me take the exact opposite.
Oh no.
So I don't like horns. Now let me just preface this by saying
He's on the other side of the room.
So let me just preface this by saying, if there's one thing that I've come to realize over the years of doing this is that each one of us seems to weigh things differently in terms of what's important to us. So, for example, some people really like bass, and there's no such thing as too much bass. And other people prize mid-range and whatever it is, imaging, et cetera, et cetera. And we are also sensitive to different things. As an example, years ago, there was this gentleman who worked for me doing installations, and he couldn't tell the difference sonically between speakers that were wired correctly or incorrectly. What I mean is, let's say you have one speaker that you've wired correctly, so red goes to red, black goes to black. He would invariably, because sometimes the installations are so dark, and this was before you had cell phones with lights on, and he'd be just connecting them up, and so one speaker is wired correctly, the other speaker is wrong, and he couldn't hear the difference. Meanwhile, I would be in the other room, and as soon as I walked in, I could instantly hear that there's something wrong. And I would sit him down and do the actual comparison for him over and over and over again. Couldn't hear the difference at all. What Jay and Philip talked about earlier about the cuppiness of a horn, that drives me crazy. I admire all the strengths that horns naturally do. The incredible macrodynamics, the microdynamics, the sensitivity increase, the ability to play low-powered tube amplifiers and so on. But the very fact that I hear that honkiness drives me nuts. And just before you leave hate mail, I've heard virtually all the horns that everybody says you should hear. They don't sound like that. I go to most of the shows and I hear them, and as soon as I hear it, it's there, and that's it. I can't get past it. So for me, it's a hard no, just for that reason alone. I love, as I said, the dynamics, because in a live event, that's one thing that you always have. You may not have great high frequencies in a live event. You may not have great bass and so on, but the dynamics are always there. Or you play an instrument and you're caressing the keyboard, and then you thunder on the keyboards. Horns can do that better than almost any speaker I can think of. But the very fact that I hear that cupped sound, and for whatever reason I just do, it's just a hard no for me. Let's talk maybe a little bit about some of the benefits. I started to get into some of that. Benefits of horn. So if you were to consider horn, what are some of the benefits that horns can give you?
Well, they tend to be very efficient right off the bat. So this means that you can drive it with very low power amplifiers, tube amplifiers, single-ended amplifiers, and so on and so forth. So you don't have that idea of I need this much power to drive the speakers. For example, like Magnepans or some of the inefficient speakers like CAF LS50s and so forth and so forth. You don't have to worry about too much about the amplification side of things in terms of power.
Okay.
The quality is a whole different topic, but anyways.
Philip?
I want to say something about what you just said, but
go ahead, do it, Philip.
The thing is, I spent a long time putting together my Altec system. I went through a ton of gear, and eventually, of course, it was all ended up being very high-end tube stuff. Not big power, but an ability. Those amps are really good. The ones I use, I still own them, and they have an ability to control things. I mean, it sounds like dogma here, but control is really important. So when you say quality, it's not necessarily so that's you can have low power, but low power without that ability to be somewhat grippy is useless.
Yeah.
Right. So I have little tiny tube amps and they sound fine, but you cannot drive them hard through a pair of horns. It just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. The sound degrades and just kind of falls apart.
Yeah.
So for me, horns have the major strength of a horn is that it has an immediacy which allows you to connect to whatever you're hearing, the music that you love, almost right away, like in a way that almost no other speaker can do at that price range. Mm-hmm. So for me, horns is an inexpensive way to get really close to all the music that you love. I'm not saying it's the best thing, and I certainly heard stuff at shows, for instance, or mostly at the store, really, which is mind-blowing. But horns can get you a lot of the way there without having to spend $200,000. So that's my opinion. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about cons. What are the negatives of horns? Jay?
Well, if you use the wrong amplification, you can literally go deaf. It's a true story. I'm not going to say who, but one of my dearest friends, if he's watching this, we met in the world of vintage, and when I was shopping for vintage, he had the Altec A7s, and he hooked them up to Bryson amplifiers, and that was an incredible experience, to say the least. My ears were ringing the next day. So you have to be careful with what you pair up with when it comes to horn speakers. I found some may sound good, some may not. So,
okay. Philip?
So the biggest thing you have to be concerned about with horns, obviously, is frequency range. Horns. The true horns are all developed at a time when amplification might have gone from about, or source materials like 50 hertz to maybe 15,000 hertz, and we often have modern systems that do much more than that. For a true horn to go low enough, it can't, because the horn actually defines how low it can go. It's not designed for that, and to add a subwoofer to it is almost as impossible as it is to do it with planar speakers, because the speed of the horn is so fast, even in the bass region, that most subwoofers cannot keep up. Maybe a servo load, like a servo controlled one, would be okay, but that's the major thing, is like, given that it has a limited kind of frequency range, if you can, it should be sufficient for most types of music, but you never get deep bass. It's just impossible. And if you really love horns, you go for the full horn system, not just like something like an Altec, Model 19, which is horn loaded in the mid range with a compression driver,
but not the woofer.
It's a good compromise because it's basically more full range, but it's not as good as a true A7 or something like that, which is actually, horn-loaded compression driver and a horn-loaded bass cabinet.
Yeah, some of the other cons, they're typically big, especially if you want a full range. They're very big. If you don't know what the A7s that they've been talking about looks like, Google it.
It's the size of a refrigerator.
They were used in theaters.
Pictures may not do it justice. Ideally, you want to see a person standing beside the speaker.
It's the compact one too. That's the compact one.
That'll give you a bit of an idea. The dispersion angle is also somewhat narrow, so you would need to sit at the apex of the speaker's dispersion if you wanted to get the highest frequencies. They can be very expensive to build, again, because you have big cabinets. You want the cabinets to be solid instead of lossy or boomy, and so again, they can be very expensive. So I guess I will give you one instance of a speaker that is still current manufacturer. I won't name the brand because I don't think it's fair. It's very hard, as Willem alluded to try and match different things. So there's a manufacturer that makes these beautiful looking horn mid-range drivers with a completely different tweeter technology, with a completely different bass technology, and really expensive. We're not talking about a few $1,000s. We're talking many tens, and there are models that are over $100,000. And the first time I heard it at the show, I was shocked in a bad way because it was totally disjointed. You could hear, how you've read or heard people say, there's no coherence. Well, this thing was definitely not coherent. The tweeters were state-of-the-art technology tweeters. The mid-range was obviously very honky and horn-like, and the bass couldn't keep up at all, not even close. Subsequently, one client has a set, and I can tell you couldn't give them to me. I mean, I literally wouldn't want those speakers, just because I would just hear how incoherent they are. So it's not to say, of course, that every horn speaker sounds like that. I'm just saying that listen to them yourself and see if you like the benefits of horns versus some of the negatives that they can and probably will have, and make up your own mind. Anyway, that's it. Unless the guys have any last words.
No, I'm just going to do this.
I love horns. I thought we were the horn team. What's going on here?
Not me.
Well, you're very horny.
That's inappropriate.
He's 25.
Of course.
That's inappropriate. Anyways. All right.
Anyway, if you like this video, please subscribe, turn on the notification, email us if you have any questions, comments, put them at the bottom of the video, and we look forward to seeing you again. Take care. Bye-bye.